Welcome to Convict Lives Australia. Today we are visiting the Castlemaine Cemetery in central Victoria to visit the final resting place of an English convict transported to Australia in 1846 for the crime of stealing 14 shillings from a man named Thomas Bevan in Birmingham. Her name was Sarah Bickley. Sarah was from Walsall, near Birmingham in England, and she was working as a housemaid in July of 1846 when she was charged with stealing money from a Thomas Bevan. She was sentenced to 7 years transportation for the theft. She was 20 years old. Sarah was taken to Warrick Jail, where she remained for a time before being moved to Millbank Prison. In March of 1847, she was put onto the transportation ship Vasia. Vasia arrived in Van Diemen's Land in July of 1847, and Sarah was described as 5'1", and she had brown hair and brown eyes. And they'd noted that she'd been 1 week on the town. Now, on the town referred to women who were engaged in prostitution or were living without a family or household and had to rely on the church or state for survival. Upon arrival in Van Diemen's Land, Sarah was taken to the Anson probation station. Now, the Anson was originally the HMS Anson, a warship that arrived in Hobart in 1844. And after disembarking its male convicts, it was refitted as a floating prison and moored at Prince of Wales Bay near Hobart. The Anson was used to alleviate overcrowding at the Cascades Female Factory by housing female convicts, and it was managed by a Dr. and Mrs. Bonin. Now, the station aimed to reform the women through various activities such as needlework, cooking and other domestic tasks. That would have been quite interesting on a whole ship. The women served a 6-month probation period during which they were taught skills to help them integrate into society as probation pass holders, basically domestic servants. The Anson could hold between 250 to 520 women at any one time. Sarah remained on the Anson for 6 months, and by March of 1848 she had been assigned to the Mills family near Hamilton, likely working as a domestic servant, of course. During her time there, she was charged with drunkenness and for having a man, one Walter Buchanan, in her room. Now, as a result, she was sentenced to 3 months hard labour at the female factory. And according to Mrs. Mills' testimony, she said, "I went to her room and found her on the bed with a man named Buchanan. The woman was drunk." Walter Buchanan also faced a similar charge, and he received a comparable sentence, though served out of chains, which is good, which is a good thing. It appears Sarah may have had more than one admirer. Around the same time, she was granted permission to marry fellow convict William Reeves. Now, William had been transported for 10 years for pickpocketing, just like Sarah. However, there is no record of the marriage ever taking place, so perhaps the incident involving Buchanan brought that relationship to an end. A year later, Sarah was granted permission to marry another man, also named William, a William Thompson. Now, just take a moment to really look at this image. Now, I always use a convict's description when generating an image with ChatGPT, and I really believe that ChatGPT has nailed it this time. They've had an upgrade, and their images are so much more realistic. Just look at this. Now, William was not a nice man, and I think the ChatGPT has just captured him really well. And I really like generating an image of a person I'm talking about to accompany their biography, because I believe it brings their story to life in a more personal and visual way. So seeing a face, even an imagined one, although remember I do use their convict descriptions, helps humanize them, and especially our ancestors or convicts whose stories might otherwise feel distant or abstract. So that's why I do it, and I just believe it makes a biography more engaging and maybe even helps people connect more emotionally with the past. So William Thompson was a fellow convict from Paisley in Scotland, and he'd been transported at the age of 24 for pickpocketing. Now, due to 2 prior convictions for pickpocketing and 1 for housebreaking, he received a 10-year sentence. Now, William had been issued his ticket of leave in October of 1848, and it is believed he was working as a shepherd when he and Sarah met. And the couple were married at Spring Bay, north of Launceston, by the Reverend Charles Dobson on the 28th of April 1849. Soon after they were married, the couple moved to Swansea, where Sarah was likely assigned to work for another family, because remember, she was still under sentence. William also found work in the area to support them both until Sarah received her ticket of leave in May of 1850, followed by a conditional pardon in September of the same year. Sometime after this, the couple relocated to northern Tasmania to a place called Sandspit, where Sarah gave birth to their first and only child, James Bryson, on the 23rd of April 1851. Two years later, Sarah was officially classified as free by servitude. This term referred to convicts who had completed the full term of their sentence, and although they were no longer under government control, they were still required to apply for a certificate of freedom. Now, ChatGPT tells me that in 1851, Sandspit, now part of the city of Launceston, was located on the northern coast of Tassie, so on the eastern side of the Tamar River. It was a point where the Sandspit, a narrow strip of land, connected the mainland to an island. So if anyone knows the accuracy of this, let me know, because I don't believe it's called Sandspit anymore. As we all know, gold was discovered in Victoria that same year, 1851, sparking a massive rush to the goldfields. Sarah and William, along with their infant son, joined the throngs of hopeful prospectors in search of fortune. In January 1852, the family boarded the aptly named Gold Seeker, departing from Hobart to Melbourne to begin their journey to the diggings. They eventually made their way to Castlemaine, settling near the Mia diggings just outside the town of Muckleford. It was here, amid the dust and promise of the goldfields, that tragedy struck. In June of 1857, a shocking incident occurred, one that would unravel the truth behind Sarah and William Thompson's marriage. The events were dramatic enough to capture the attention of newspapers across the region. The Ovens and Murray Advertiser published a detailed account, shedding light on the circumstances that led to the revelation and the heartbreaking consequences that followed. Monday, 15th of June, 1857, page 3. We have to record another lamentable diggings murder committed at Mere near Muckleford under the following circumstances. A man named William Thompson and his wife lived unhappily under the combined results of intemperance and jealousy. On the 4th instant they quarrelled, and Mrs. Thompson, snatching up a knife, inflicted a mortal wound upon her husband by stabbing him in the left side of the chest, between the 4th and 5th ribs. The husband fell, exclaiming, "The Lord be merciful to a sinner," and expired in about 5 minutes. The woman was arrested. A coroner's jury has returned a verdict of willful murder against her, and she has been committed to take her trial. The Bendigo Advertiser went into even more detail. So reporting from the Castlemaine Circuit Court on Tuesday the 11th of August 1857 under the headline Murder. Sarah Thompson was indicted for the willful murder of William Thompson on the 4th of June. The prisoner, who was respectfully dressed, was accompanied in the dock by a little boy, apparently her son. Mr. McDermott stated the case. The deceased was prisoner's husband and at the time of his death was carrying on the business of a butcher at the Mere diggings near Muckleford. On the 4th of June between 8 and 9 p.m, a number of persons were drinking in the deceased's tent, and it would appear, from what they would state, that the prisoner stabbed her husband, with whom she had lived very uncomfortably. The learned counsel said it was possible circumstances might be detailed which would reduce the crime to the mitigated form of manslaughter, and therefore asked the jury's attentive consideration of the evidence. George Cotton Levi, or Levi, depending on how you want to pronounce that, a boy of about 10 years of age, deposed that as he was passing the deceased's tent on the evening of the 4th of June, he heard the deceased say in an angry tone of voice, "There's one for you," and he saw a man run out of the tent, and the prisoner followed immediately. She lifted up a knife from the block in the shop, saying, "Where's that George? If I'll catch him, I will stick him." She followed him only a few yards. She returned to the tent, went up to the deceased and stabbed him in the breast. And young George Cotton Levi went on to describe what he saw. And he said that Sarah didn't say anything to William before she stabbed him, but after she did, he fell back saying, "Oh, you," I think that's a swear word because it's just dots, "you've stabbed me." And then he crawled to a seat, and young George immediately went and informed Mr. Straoud of the circumstances. And George also said that he'd seen 2 men inside the tent and Mrs. Edkins in the bed in the tent. So I have no idea what was going on, but it sounds very sordid, the whole drama. And I think this is why Sarah has stabbed William. She's come in to their home tent and there has been some men in the tent. There's a woman, apparently she's a naked woman in another article, which I'll read in a minute. It says she was naked in the bed. And so Sarah's obviously just had enough and she's stabbed him. So the whole thing sounds terrible, but so once William was stabbed, young George saw Sarah kissing the deceased as he lay dead on the ground, and she was saying it was his own fault. And corroborative evidence was adduced, and the jury, after hearing all the evidence, returned a verdict of manslaughter, and the prisoner was remanded for sentence. Now, the Mount Alexander Mail on Monday the 8th of June 1857 has gone into even more detail of some other witness testimonies. And apparently a Mr. McLean and Mr. Straoud had said there'd been people drinking in the tent all day, but they hadn't heard any fighting. The article goes on to describe 5 more witness testimonies, including the doctor's report from William's autopsy. And as you might expect, every witness offered a different version of events. And just before I go on, this is the Chinese burning tower, where the Chinese diggers used to put in offerings for their dead ancestors. And it's still standing in the Castlemaine cemetery. So Elizabeth Edkins, the woman accused of being in the Thompson's bed, testified that she was merely in the tent fetching some washing, and that when she'd emerged from the bedroom and saw William lying on the ground bleeding, she'd screamed, "Murder!" She also recalled a previous incident in which she had seen William beating Sarah and swearing at her while both were heavily intoxicated. The next witness was Eliza Straoud. I'll just let you read this. The memorial erected to the memory of our early Chinese ancestors. Yeah. And they just keep it looking really well maintained too. So well done, Castlemaine Cemetery. It's actually a really, really lovely cemetery. And so the next witness was an Eliza Straoud, presumably the wife of Mr. Straoud. And she said she was in her tent at about 9 p.m. when she heard someone scream, "Murder!" And she raced over to the Thompson's tent. And on the way, she'd encountered a young boy, George Levi, or the young boy, who told her that Mr. Thompson had been stabbed. And when Eliza entered the tent, she saw William lying wounded on the ground. And according to her, he said, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner." And he'd also murmured, "My Jenny." But who is Jenny? There are no reports of a Jenny living near the camp, which makes the situation even sadder, especially for Sarah. Their marriage had never been a happy one, and it seems the two were never truly in love. And I just want to highlight this amazing, or I don't know what you'd call it, but all the old headstones that they've just set up here. What a fantastic way to preserve old headstones that have fallen down and been damaged. And they're all just lined up along the entrance to the cemetery. I think that's a fantastic idea, and I only wish many more cemeteries would do that, especially the Melbourne General Cemetery. So many headstones are in disarray at that cemetery, and this would be a fantastic way. And I know at the Ararat Cemetery they do something similar to this, which is a great idea, and just makes for a really nice memorial. Okay, let's get back to the story. Mrs. Straoud also testified that she'd seen Elizabeth Edkins in the Thompson's bed undressed, and she told her to get dressed, and then exclaimed, "Lizzie, you have been the cause of all of this." And she was likely right. The whole situation was just clearly sorted. It appears Sarah walked in on her husband with Elizabeth Edkins and in a drunken rage reacted violently, killing her husband. There were two more witness statements, one from William Sim and another from a Jacob Cobb. Sim could hardly recall anything due to being extremely drunk, and Cobb had called for the doctor after seeing what happened. Now the doctor, just before I go on about the doctor, here is Sarah's grave. And it's amazing. I'll explain who James Greenwood is and why she's now Sarah Greenwood in a minute. But James Greenwood, his descendants from England have paid for that headstone to be erected and as a memory. I just think that's so fantastic because, as you'll learn later, James was also a convict and he didn't have any descendants in Australia, but his descendants in England, or must be his great nieces and nephews, whatever, they've all banded together and paid for that memorial. And this is where Sarah lies at the Castlemaine Cemetery with her son and her second husband, James Greenwood, who we will learn about in one moment. And here is section M, and section M is the Jewish section of the cemetery, and it's right up the back. And apparently I could only find one grave, and that was of Jonathan Pearl, who died in 2000. But according to the Australian Jewish Historical Society, there are 6 graves in this area from 1878 to 2000. So the doctor who was called was a Dr. Charles Henry Hardy. if he was a doctor at all. And now, interestingly, there is a website dedicated to his questionable medical practices, but that's another story. Anyway, his autopsy report largely confirmed what the witnesses had described, and ultimately the jury returned a verdict that William Thompson died from a wound inflicted by his wife, Sarah Thompson. Now, unfortunately, I have not been able to find any information about where Sarah served her sentence or even what her sentence was for the manslaughter conviction. I'm not sure why the details are so elusive. I've searched under both names, Sarah Bickley and Sarah Thompson, but I have not had any luck locating her. My best guess is that she served her time at the Melbourne Jail in Russell Street. Now, if anyone has any information about where Sarah did serve her sentence and for how long, please share it in the comments below. But what we do know is that by 1879, Sarah was back in Castlemaine, where she married another ex-convict, a man named James Greenwood. Now, James was transported for life in 1837 for sheep stealing, and he was 23 years old. His conduct record says that he was married to a woman named Anne at the time of his transportation. So convicts who were already married before transportation were technically still legally married, as transportation did not annul their original marriages. However, due to the extreme unlikelihood of reuniting with their spouses, many convicts presumed their marriages were effectively over and sought to marry. Well, these would have been the convicts whose spouses didn't journey with them to Australia or come later, which many also did. So permission was required. Convicts needed government approval to marry, especially if they were still serving their sentences, and this was marriage through the registers of convicts' applications to marry. Authorities attempted to verify whether a convict was already married to prevent bigamy, but record keeping was often incomplete, and especially for those transported before the mid-1820s. Applications were assessed based on behaviour, prior marital status and public notices, the bans. And if approved, the marriage could proceed. Now, the colonial government supported convict marriages as a way to promote order and moral reform. Married convicts often received benefits like tickets of leave or help with settling. Due to poor communication with Britain and the passage of time, many convicts remarried regardless of their status back home, with or without full legal clarity. Now, I did a little digging, and Anne actually remarried in 1842 in England. So the couple had well and truly moved on by the time Sarah and James married in 1879. Now, it's also reported that James took Sarah's son James on as his own son, which is a very nice ending to this story, and they shared the same name. So little James Bryson went on to work as a blacksmith in Castlemaine and went on to have 17 children of his own with his wife Mary Ann Blake. So what a legacy. Sarah has many descendants in both Australia and New Zealand. The couple both lived well into their old ages, with James dying in 1882 and Sarah 12 years later in 1894. Though Sarah Bickley's life was shaped by hardship, it was also marked by extraordinary resilience. From a young housemaid in England, convicted of theft, to a transported convict navigating the harsh realities of colonial Australia, Sarah endured punishment, poverty, and personal tragedy. Her journey took a darker turn on the Victorian goldfields, as we know, yet Sarah's story did not end in scandal. She later found stability with James Greenwood, a fellow former convict, who accepted both her and her son as family. In Castlemaine, they built a quieter life, and Sarah lived out her final years with a measure of peace. Today we remember Sarah not just for her crime or her struggles, but for her strength, her survival, and the family she forged against the odds. Her story remains a powerful reminder of the human stories behind the penal system, and a part of our extraordinary convict history.